Sorry guys if this video is not as smooth as others. I am filming in Japan. I'm right outside my Airbnb right now. This is our cute side street. I'm in Tokyo right now and I'm having so much fun. But I really wanted to film a video here, especially because this is like the book that my channel's Namesake is based on. And it's one of my favorite books of all time. And it's written by a Japanese author. So this was a big goal of mine, was to be here and to get to do one of these reviews. But because of that, I'm kind of just doing everything in like one take. So it's not going to be quite as smooth, but I hope you guys can still enjoy it. It's impossible to talk about this book until you do something that I rarely do on this channel, which is talk about the author. Shoji Tsushima, better known as his pen name Osamu Dazai, was born in 1909 in Japan, and his life is a complete tragedy. He grew up in a relatively wealthy family but dealt with crippling mental health issues his entire life. Desperate to look for things that he could cope with, he turned to some classics like alcohol, and he actually developed a painkiller addiction. His life was a constant battle of terrible things to deal with. He cheated on his wife. He was cheated on by his wife. He went through multiple marriages. He turned to drugs and alcohol. And he sought the final permanent solution to his problem 5 times in his life, attempting suicide both alone as well in joint lover suicide, all of which, until his last, the partner died and he did not. But finally, he took his own life in 1948 at just age 38 after a lover's suicide by drowning. Published a month after his death, No Longer Human is his pseudo-autobiography. While not everything happened exactly in real life as it was described in the book, most of the story did indeed happen to Dazai. The book is written as a series of notebooks by our one-named narrator, Yozo. And to an external observer, it may look like he had a comfy upbringing because he grew up as the youngest of 10 in a very rich family, and he actually did quite well in school. But from a very young age, it's clear that he did not see the world as others do. His life is shrouded in fear and anxiety and an overwhelming disconnect from others. So what's the plot of this book? No Longer Human is the story of Yozo's life as he stumbles through his existence, desperately seeking for ways to cope with his misery of simply being alive. This book is riveting, not because he's saving the world from aliens or solving a brilliant mystery, but because he explains the drama and the hardships of life with such intense relatability. Before I get into the themes of this book, I want to say one thing, or make one thing clear, which is that while I love Yozo as a main character, I find him objectively completely disgusting. It reminds me a lot of one of my other favorite books, A Clockwork Orange, with its main character, Alex. Yozo is a bad human being. He cheats, he lies, he's mean, he's a bully. And the thing is, he would say this about himself, though. He would say he's a terrible guy. He's full of self-hatred, and he even talks about how all his woes and his faults are the result of his own inability to control his vices. I hope people can recognize this as yogurt. I hope people can recognize this as Yozo projecting that salacious self-deprecation of a person who is intensely depressed, but he's still definitely not without his faults. I think everyone is redeemable, but his philosophy about the world is really misguided. He also says some really condescending things about women and mental health patients, and a lot of this is because of the time that it was written, but I also think it's right to say that, well, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I absolutely do not mean that I co-sign anything that Yozo expresses in the book. At its core, this book is the best depiction of depression that I have ever come across. It's better than any clinical definition, any emotional song, any tragic movie, anything. If someone wanted to learn about depression and they said, like, I want to understand, I can't objectively understand how someone can feel constant abject pain, I would just refer them to read this book. Yozo is so textbook depressed about everything in the world. Literally everything he sees, whether it's his family, whether it's nature, a department store, whatever, is behind this gray filter. Everything is negative and dreary, and not because he's a curmudgeon. It's clear that he has serious depression. And if I haven't convinced you yet, I found this quote really interesting. Quote, "It terrified me to sit by myself quietly in my room. I felt frightened, as if I might be set upon or struck by someone at any moment." And if you're a little insane like me, you've probably taken a bunch of GAD-7s, which is like the anxiety questionnaire, and this sounds literally exactly like a question that's on there where they ask you to mark how often you're, quote, feeling afraid as if something awful might happen. His dreary, bleak outlook on the world makes this a hard book to read page to page. Reading this book really does sort of feel like a grieving session. Check out the cat. Hi, kitty. The crux of Yozo's suffering, which is a theme throughout his life, is his feelings of alienation. Never once in his life does he feel thorough, authentic connection with anyone, and this makes his life completely unbearable. Even when he's in relationships, they're either shrouded in some sort of underlying dislike or otherwise an unhealthy fear of the other person. And then he develops all these little sub-fears that stem from this general fear of humanity. Like, he struggles with occasional agoraphobia, and then germs, and even like uncommon things. Like, he talks about how he walks around worried that he's going to step on glass. And these all kind of compound into this terrible gestalt of anxiety about everyone and everything around him. Yozo writes like he's uniquely ailing from this alienation, but I want to challenge his perspective on this, because I think the irony, of which he never recognizes, is that pain, this profound sense of disconnect from everyone, is unfortunately a very human thing. The book has over 200,000 fucking Goodreads ratings. So clearly this sense of alienation is something that resonates with tons of people. The human experience is very isolating and it's scary, and this book verbalizes that, and that's why it's so validating to read. Okay, I got out of a cold shower like 10 minutes ago, and I've been outside for 10 minutes. Oh my god, it's already so hot out. It's like high 80s, I guess. I'm from Minnesota, so I'm not ready for that. So I've talked a lot about his feelings of alienation, but he doesn't just lock himself away from the world. A lot of this book is about how he develops a variety of coping skills to help him interact with the world, all of them various degrees of maladaptive, though. When he's young, he calls himself the clown, and he uses this humor as a shield. He says that he doesn't care what people think because it's like a clown greeting their audience. It's a show. When he's young, he develops his passion for drawing, which follows him through his entire life. He perpetuates, his clowning by drawing comics and making people laugh through those. But in private, he draws terribly ugly self-portraits of himself depicting his, quote, harrowing reality. In his adult life, he goes to a lot of the classics as well, quote, I soon came to understand that drink, tobacco, and prostitutes were all excellent means of dissipating my dread for human beings. Yozo's family and friends in his life were not people that really cared about him. The closest thing he gets is people that share in his misery. The only character that shows anything close to some sort of love for him is someone he disparagingly calls Flatfish, which is an acquaintance of his father's that sort of provides monetary support, but largely nothing else. Yozo is repeatedly disappointed by anyone that he puts trust into. And I think more than anything, this book just makes me feel sad for him, that he has nobody. And there are people out there like that. It just goes to show how everyone needs, whether they have it or not, a person that can look out for them. Everyone deserves that. It could be a friend, a therapist, a parent, a boss, a religious figure, whatever. Everyone just needs one. This next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. And so if you're here purely for the book stuff, go ahead and skip this next section. Quote, mine has been a life of much shame. I can't even guess myself what it must be to live the life of a human being. That's how this book starts out. Yozo is alienated from the world. He feels such a lack of happiness and connection to the human experience that he considers himself inhuman. My first experience with this book was when I read the manga adaptation of it about 7 years ago when I was in college. And this was a time in my life where I felt very isolated and I felt disconnected from my classmates and even my friends and my family. And that's when I found this manga. Reading it was a cathartic experience. It validated what I had been thinking for years and years. I vividly remember reading it and I was like, how can someone want to live in a world like this? My mental and physical health has been very tumultuous during my adult life, and I've used the tag barely human to describe my feelings similar to Dazai. Sometimes I feel like I'm bound to humanity with just this thin cord that could break at any moment. You could say I'm barely connected, I'm barely human. This book and the manga stuck with me for so long, but I do think that I have a unique perspective because since reading the manga adaptation 7 years ago, I've received literally hundreds of hours of mental and physical health support, and it gives me a new perspective on Yozo's struggle. Recovering and accepting support, as I've learned, is a huge leap of faith, and going through a lot of that changed my outlook on parts of this book. A specific scene that I've flipped my perspective on a lot is the one scene where Flatfish makes somewhat of an attempt to help Yozo with his problems, but Yozo is incapable of accepting it because he's distracted so much by Flatfish's ingenuousness. My second time reading this, I just felt so frustrated for Yozo. Like, dude, accept the help. Don't give up. Don't resign to your disillusionment. Flatfish is no perfect lifeline. In fact, he treats Yozo quite poorly, but he's something. When I first read the manga, I had a bit of an acceptance about the tragedy of life back then, and I still do now, but I also have a perspective of healing and self-improvement mentally, of finding coping skills and support. It makes me feel sad for Yozo. It's not because he's a weak or stupid individual, it's just that he has a disease, and he couldn't find the strength to fight against it, and doesn't have the people to urge him to fight either. I'm sure many of you would agree that the quickest way to a strong connection with someone is to share vulnerabilities. And this book is Dazai sharing a deluge of vulnerability, a very relatable cocktail of depression and isolation and alienation and addiction. And there's almost like this human connection between readers and Dazai. He talks about his experience, and readers can relate to that, like, yeah, that's exactly how it feels. I think this book absolutely serves its purpose as a gateway into the mind of someone disillusioned with the world, whether that be for someone looking for validation and recognition, or for someone ignorant to that frame of mind that wants an understanding of it. For whatever reason you decide to read this book, I hope that it becomes even half as impactful for you as it was for me. Thanks for watching. This book is so personally important to me that, for my own sake, I wanted to include a variety of notes and quotes that meant a lot to me, but I just couldn't find a good place for them in a review, so I'm just going to put them here. It slipped in at the beginning that he's molested as a child, something that's never mentioned again, but something that I absolutely think probably played a more profound impact on his life than he might know or admit. Okay, so now I've got some quotes. This is just tragic. Quote, "I have tried insofar as possible to avoid getting involved in the sordid complications of human beings. I love this imagery." Quote, "Just when I was beginning to forget, that bird of ill omen came flapping my way, to rip open with its beak the wounds of memory. This is terribly sad." Quote, "The more I feared people, the more I was liked. And the more I was liked, the more I feared them. A process which eventually compelled me to run away from everybody." Here he talks about how company in his misery brings him peace. Quote, "I feel so unhappy. I am sure that this one phrase whispered to me would arouse my sympathy more than the lowest, most painstaking account of a woman's life. A silent current of misery an inch wide flowed over the surface of her body. When I lay next to her, my body was enveloped in her current. I had freed myself from fear and uneasiness." This was very relatable to me, especially as a kid. Quote, "Although I had a mortal dread of human beings, I seemed quite unable to renounce their society. I managed to maintain on the surface a smile which never deserted my lips." I love macabre, specifically Erogura art, which I've talked about in previous reviews, and this reminds me as to why I love it so much. Quote, "There are some people whose dread of human beings is so morbid that they reach a point where they yearn to see with their own eyes monsters of ever more horrible shapes." Here's a great quote about him feeling inhuman. Quote, "In other words, you might say that I still have no understanding of what makes human beings tick. My apprehension on discovering that my concept of happiness seemed to be completely at variance with that of everyone else was so great as to make me toss sleeplessly and groan night after night in my bed. It drove me indeed to the brink of lunacy. I wonder if I have actually ever been happy. People have told me, really more times than I can remember, ever since I was a small boy, how lucky I was, but I have always felt as if I were suffering in hell. Nothing is sadder than a complete lack of hope. Listen to this." Quote, "I want to die. I want to die more than ever before. There's no chance now of a recovery. No matter what sort of thing I do, no matter what I do, it's sure to be a failure. just a final coating applied to my shame. That dream of going on bicycles to see a waterfall framed in summer leaves, it was not for the likes of me. All that can happen now is that one foul, humiliating sin will be piled on another, and my sufferings will become only the more acute. I want to die. I must die. Living itself is a source of sin. This one hit me like a ton of bricks. I just can't believe how young this all happened to him. Quote, "This year I am 27. My hair has become much grayer. Most people would take me for over 40.